My name's Alex, I'm Punx Ardent Cosplay, and we're doing a talk about props. I've also got with me Dominic from Ardent Cosplay now. Dom, do you want to just introduce yourself a little bit?
Well, I'm going to start off with the first lesson that I would give to all prospective props and makers, which is make your costume so you can sit down, because I can't.
Yeah, this is why we are awkwardly standing here today, because game developers do not think about actual wearing of practicality of clothing in real life.
Oh, they really don't. Like, I can't actually sit down in these, and I can't feed myself in these authentic shaped armor pieces. So always field test your cosplay before you bring it to a con, unless you're a complete idiot like me. So, what are we going to start with?
Okay, so do you want to start? Talk about what you've got on now first. We'll talk about your warbler.
Okay, right. Well, this is, some of you may know, this is Commander Callan from Dragon Age Inquisition, and it is a warbler armor build that is a thermoplastic. Thermoplastics are incredibly useful when it comes to cosplay, especially armor. What we have here is an example of the sandwich technique for making armor, which is making an original shell out of foam, usually EVA foam, like plastozote, something like that, and then surrounding it with 2 layers of sheeted thermoplastic. Now, thermoplastic comes in a lot of different types. The most common is warbler. You'll probably heard about that if you have anything to do with cosplay whatsoever. Other types include polymorph, which can be molded from an oven or heated up in cold water, and Wonderflex, which is like warbler except it doesn't stretch quite as much, so it's stronger. So what we have here, these are made of Wonderflex on the inside because it doesn't hold detail as much. It doesn't hold detail as much, but it is stronger because it has a nylon mesh backing. And on the top, we've got a specific type of warbler called black warbler, which is a lot finer than the regular stuff. Okay, now the process to start with creating a set of armor like this has got to be the foam. Foam, like EVA, is heat moldable, so you can mold it with a heat gun, or you can heat it up in an oven to about 70 degrees or so, at which point you can bend it into a shape, and then when it cools it will stay in that shape. So I made the process, for example, by tracing out a pattern on the foam, cutting it with a sharp knife, and then heating up the foam, curling it round, and gluing it together with contact glue to make a cylinder. Now, then after that, I added the detailing by sticking other layers of foam on top of that, including craft foam, which is 2mm, you can get it from Hobbycraft, so it's really simple. That's what made all the standing out details here. And then I took a layer of the thermoplastic I was talking to you about earlier and layered it over the top, heated it up with a hot glue gun, with a hot air gun even, again, and then sort of molded it onto the top of the foam until it set and became basically a sort of very hard plastic. So, pretty much like that. It's quite durable, and the next stage to that really is actually smoothing it down, because warbler has a bit of a rough texture. And to get a metallic texture like this, you have to put a lot of work in. There are 2 ways you can do this. First of all, you can put layers of wood glue onto it. Wood glue is, or a kind of PVA, thicker PVA, and that dries, and if you put enough layers on it, it'll sort of smooth it out into a sheen. The other way to do it, which is what I did, is put on either car body filler or artist's gesso. Car filler you could spray filling, and then sanding it down. Starting off with 200 grit sandpaper, then moving up to wet sanding with 400, 600, and in the end 1200 before painting. Then this is, to get a metallic surface like this, you want to use an airbrush or a spray can. This is several different types of spray can. And then weathering, just take some darker brown or darker black, and just dab it on, and then brush it away with a sponge in places to create a sort of mixed patina effect, like that.
And just for curiosity purposes, how much is all the warbler, all the Wonderflex, all the foam, how much is actually in there in terms of value?
If I counted it halfway through, I probably would have stopped, so I didn't count. in total, because this was the first set of armour that I actually made, and it took me months to try and get right and experiment with all the right techniques, so I must have gone through about 200, 300 quid's worth of warbler, of which about 150 quid's worth is actually in this costume itself, maybe closer to 100, but so many things went wrong that I had to chuck them out and start over.
Again, this is the biggest thing with cosplay. You've got to budget in mistakes. Think how much you need to spend in order to make it once, and then budget for 2, at least 3 times that, because you will make mistakes if you are adamant on getting it perfect.
Yeah, at least if it's the first thing you're making. The other thing I would say about that, I think, is be more forgiving with your first costume and your first props than I am. There's a point at which you've got to say, okay, look, that's enough is enough. It looks great. It's going to look great from 10 feet away, which is the distance that most people take photos. In the cosplay community, we call it the 10-foot rule. And you've got to sort of start off and be aware that the stuff that you make first is not going to be the best stuff you ever make. Just be able to move on.
Yeah, I mean,
do better.
Moving on to just EVA foam here. This is the first thing I ever made out of EVA foam. Now, this is a gauntlet, a battle gauntlet from a character I do called Blackboard Greymon, a TV show called Digimon. And basically these gauntlets were the first part I made of this costume, the first thing I ever made out of EVA foam. I made one, it was horrific, discarded it, made another one, and even this. So this is just EVA floor mats. This is even from Hobbycraft. I went to the Halfords, bought loads of floor mats, and got the template printed out, sized it to some of my size, printed it out, and again, you heat gun it into shape, coat it in wood glue, and then spray paint it, each individual section. Now, as I've worn this a few times, falling apart a little bit in places. You know, these things do start to fall apart. But as an example, you've got this is something that's purely EVA foam, which is obviously what's within the warbler there. Used to structure it, but for large, undetailed pieces, EVA foam is a good budget for this.
Yes, it's perfectly good as long as you don't want to put too much detail or put too much stress on it. Okay, right, so what should we do now? You want to talk about wood?
Yeah, okay, I'll talk
wood.
about
Wood is Alex's favourite subject.
Well, thank you, yeah, I'll talk about my wood, okay. Okay, so predominantly when I'm building props, I predominantly work with wood. So, as you see, this is a replica samurai sword, katana blade, used by the character Hiro Nakamura in Heroes. So the construction is wood entirely with a bit of epoxy. So I'm going to go use the other microphone so I can actually hold this and talk. Okay, so yeah, so working with things like this, predominantly whenever you make anything, any kind of weapon, the blade is a separate section to the handle. So I got this template, made the blade separately. It would slot in like a jigsaw. Had a little sort of jigsaw piece in there. The handle, cut the slot, put that in. So because the blade's so much thinner than the handle usually, you don't want to be sanding down something from the thickness of the handle all the way to the blade. The handle is coated in something called epoxy sculpt. Epoxy sculpt is a wondrous substance. It's essentially a clay, but it's 2-part clay, so when you mix them together then it starts to dry and harden, but you've got a good 2 hours working time. So there's also an adhesive, so you can bond things together, shape things, craft things, essentially anything you want with it. And as with wood, if you want to get it to look like metal, again, going back to what Dom was saying about sanding, sanding is key. Every grit of sandpaper, one at a time, sand it, sand it, sand it, and eventually you'll get it down to smooth enough that when you prime it and paint it, it will actually have something that resembles a metal effect. Another example here, this is a scythe from Buffy the Vampire Slayer. So again, this is an entirely wood construction without epoxy. Again, the jigsawing technique and throwing the bits together, because there's about 4 different sections to this. I mean, it's dead simple working with wood really. All you need is a good jigsaw, a belt sander ideally, hand sander and a rotary tool. If you've got these, you can make pretty much anything out of wood. So yeah. So, Dom, do you want to talk about your giant sword?
Yeah, I'm going to talk about the Inquisition longsword from Dragon Age. BioWare believe that you can wield this with one hand. You can't. This is actually this is not wooden construction apart from the handle. The handle is made of hickory wood. It's actually an adapted handle from a tool shop that I bought that's intended to have an axe head put on it, but it was roughly the right shape for this. The blade itself is actually attached to the handle via an aluminium rod, an aluminium tube that sort of goes the entire length of the sword, and I can actually pull the aluminium tube out of the handle and collapse it a little bit for transit. I'm going to have to take this to Norway in a suitcase this summer, so fingers crossed. The blade itself
Don't get
is...
shot at the airport.
I'm also bringing a crossbow from the Hunger Games, so I'm going to get into...
It's nice knowing you.
So basically the blade here is actually made out of fiberglass. Now fiberglass is quite tricky to work with. I would say that when you're sanding and when you're spraying paint, you need to wear a dust mask at least. One of those paper masks that you get from pretty much anywhere, or I wouldn't trust the pound down ones.
Well vented area. You do not want. You will get high as hell if
yes,
you
and
don't.
that. Also do it in a well ventilated area, ideally with a fan blowing. With fiberglass, you do need specialist masks, so yeah, I'd encourage you to go on the internet and do your research before you start doing it.
Is essentially, when it comes to cosplay, don't play with your health. Fumes, anything else, fumes, spray paint, anything like that. Make sure you're well vented area and you've got the necessary protection for your lungs.
Absolutely. Even when you're heating up some kind of plastics, you can get fumes off them. I have a friend in America who accidentally killed a budgie overheating some EVA foam. So don't be that person. Save budgies. Okay, so the process to construct the blade here was fairly simple. Like I said, the base is an aluminium rod around which I wrapped some foam to sort of bulk out the core, because fiberglass is very strong, so you don't need that much of it. And then what happened was I took sheets of fiberglass and laid them above and below the internal rod, and then covered the entire thing with resin. Waited for that to dry a little bit, put another layer on, continued, etc. Then, basically, a lot of sanding happened, and
So much sanding.
yeah, it's a continuing theme. A lot of sanding, first with a belt sander, and then with a hand sander, and then by hand to sort of get it down to this typical sword-like shape. And then I had this perfect sword-like shape, and then I had a look at the model from the game, and it had a whole load of chips in it, so I had to take my perfect finish and take a Dremel to it, crying all through the way.
Did you cry?
A couple of,
Very manly tears.
Yes.
Very manly tears.
Yeah. Okay, so the technique that I used to get the pommel and get the cross trees right was I used foam board to get these sort of angular shape, and then put warbler over the top of that. Once I sort of folded the foam board into the right shape. Foam board you can pick up from Hobbycraft. It's really good for sort of prototyping lots of flat shapes or areas with lots of sharp angles on it. You just again cut it with a sharp knife and then fold it into the right shape, and layer warbler over the top of it. The eye detail I put on here, I actually carved out of milliput, which is a kind of epoxy putty you can buy from Hobbycraft, which you mix it together, and it takes about 6 hours to set fully.
Yeah, that's an epoxy sculpt is one of the most versatile substances when you're working with props. It's an adhesive, you can use it to carve any detail. Once you put the base on, you cut into it, carve it down. I've used it on a number of my props as well. For example, the handle on this is all epoxy, layer of epoxy, cut into it with a blade. You can essentially make anything you want, any detail you want on any prop with epoxy sculpt.
And there are faster setting versions of epoxy that you can buy to repair armour or repair props when you've made a mistake or when you've accidentally broken it. There's stuff you can get from car repair shops that will, and B&Q, Wix, that will set in about 5 minutes or so. So that can be good for emergency repairs, and you can just paint over the top of it. I will now demonstrate this. What happened when I took this to my first con, which was MCN 2 weeks ago, as I was loading into the car, the cross tree snapped. So you can see a little repair line alongside. If you look closer, you can come and have a look at this afterwards if you like. And what I did was simply put it back together, hot glue it together, put some of this quick setting epoxy along the seams, and then respray it. And the whole repairing process only took about 2 hours. And I can see the fault line, and it really annoys me. But I thought I'd leave it on there because no one else has ever mentioned it. So
Cosplay perfectionists.
Exactly.
When it comes to, I think we're both the same on this, we're our biggest critics when we come to our own work. A single fault line, a single mark, can completely ruin it in our eyes, but you've got to learn to let that go if you do suffer from this condition.
Yeah, absolutely. So what's next up there?
What do we need to talk about still? We talked about that. Let's have a look, see what else we can talk about. Essentially, when you come to a Comic-Con, there are rules regarding props. They must be safe and not going to actually harm anyone. Now, for example, the general rule is, if I were to hit you with it, would you break before it does? So if I was to come on stage and whack Chloe here with the camera with this would snap in half long before she does, and probably she would be almost completely unharmed. So, because it's pine wood, it's a soft wood, it's not going to do any real harm to anyone. Now, obviously metal blades are completely banned at most cons when it comes to bows as well. So,
yeah. And I'm going to say right now, even fiberglass is banned at some cons. So if they look too closely, which they usually don't, they probably wouldn't allow this in if they were sticking to the letter of the rules. The reason I made it out of fiberglass was it's my first sword. I know how to work with fiberglass from a previous job, and it has to be very robust when you're making something this length, because when you're making your way through crowds, you've always got to consider that there's going to be someone rushing past who might catch it and snap it. This is the balance when you're making Comic-Con props. You've got to make it durable enough so that it's not just going to break at the slightest knock, but you've got to make it fragile enough so it passes the test at the gates, essentially. Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, so there's some things as well, like I once had a spear for another prop. There was someone else, the shaft was made out of a curtain pole, and this is a hardwood. So that has actually got taken off me one time at a con because it was way too solid and would have broken the con rules, essentially. Each con has different rules, so you want to make sure you check the rules before you go to any Comic-Con, because you don't want a disappointment of having a prop taken off you at the gates. Yeah, absolutely. And tangentially on that, everyone knows the situation, the way things are in most big Western cities at the moment. If you're going to bring firearms, like fake firearms, to a con, then for heaven's sake, keep them wrapped up, make sure they don't come out in public, and make sure that they are either orange tipped or you wrap them up with orange electrical tape, just to make it absolutely clear that they are fakes. But yeah, basically don't get them outside the con. For God's sake, don't be that guy who has the riot police brought to a con, because they will turn up, guns and everything. We had an example last year, a guy cosplay, the Bucky incident, a guy doing a photo shoot in Canary Wharf, which is private land anyway, he shouldn't have been doing it there. He was cosplaying the Winter Soldier from the Marvel films, getting his rifle out of a very realistic metal box in a toilet cubicle, in a toilet in general, public toilet. Someone came in, saw it, went out, called the police, and he got arrested in Canary Wharf. Someone came in and saw him kitting up, and he wasn't even going to get the prop outside, but someone walked in, saw him kitting up, and quite realistically assumed that he was kitting up for a terrorist attack. So the police promptly turned up. I think what happened to him in the end? He got arrested, got a good telling off from the police. There were no charges pressed, I think, in the end. Yeah. But he spent the day in the sales, and there was a big media fuss as well. So it brings a lot of weight down on the cosplay community in general. Yeah. If people get caught like that, it puts pressure on the rest of us. Yeah, and you end up in the Daily Mail, and no one wants to. No one wants to be in the Daily Mail. No one wants to be in the Daily Mail. We don't have to be guns either. I mean, for example, this sword, I have had several people ask me, is it real? Because the blades, okay, not realistic, but from this angle at a distance,
you can't tell the difference between that and a real samurai sword. And so I would not walk around the streets with this outside of the con area. So I've got bin liners just to wrap it up, don't want to cause a panic.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, this is a little bit less realistic as an actual weapon. So I carry it to just do from the con by the blade, and I never have any problems. Basically, use common sense. What kind of thing would the police be most worried about?
If it doesn't look like a real weapon, if it's a big, ridiculous fantasy gun, then you don't need to, because it's obviously not real. Like this as well, it's quite obviously not real, borderline, but again, so it's just a question of could it be mistaken for real? You know it's not real, everyone here knows it's not real. Panicky member of the public, doesn't know what Comic-Con is, could easily think a number of things are real.
Okay.
I think we've covered pretty much everything. Is there anything more you want to talk about?
No, I think we're done.